This is the golden question. Hello, guys. Welcome to episode 4 of the Golden Question podcast. Today we're going to be answering one simple question, and it's subjective. It might not be simple for you. But essentially, it's how can government help during these times of crisis? I'm going to be listing out several reasons, and you might see a pattern in them. So again, this one I'm uploading a little bit late because I was a bit busy in the morning. Today is the first day of class resuming. We sort of had a 1 week break, and over the past week, and now we're resuming classes on Monday. So I'm sort of doing a little bit more schoolwork, but it shouldn't hinder my ability to push out more podcasts. So I'll continue to try to do them every day. And what's funny is that I'm sitting down and I'm seeing the education online, and it's really astonishing how it's working. The fact that I'm able to sit on my desk, the comfort of my own home, not spend money on food, because if I had to travel, I'm gonna have to eat outside. I could stay at home. I don't have to waste time, right? Time is limited, obviously. If I would prefer not to waste it, and I don't have to waste it on commuting. So there's a lot of benefits to online education, and I think because the government has taken over the education system, it hasn't allowed the education system to sort of evolve and grow. And I think 10 years ago we should have already been online educating, but because it's controlled by the government, we're still sort of caveman style education, where we sit down in a classroom, the teacher's lecturing us and she's giving out papers and textbooks and all these things. Again, we're wasting paper. Meanwhile, you could be doing stuff online. So again, it's all this stuff that the government does, but it backfires because the government is so behind and so inefficient that it actually hurts us in the long term. Because now, right, let's just say global warming is something that should be taken seriously. Why aren't we moving to online education? Why is education still in schools? Why hasn't the government moved to online education? I mean, we've known about global warming 20-30 years ago, so why haven't we moved? And it's because government is slow. There's no profit motive. There's no incentive for them to improve the system. They actually, a lot of these education systems are heavily unionized, and so they would prefer to just have as many people. Because if you realize if they move online, they're gonna have to fire a lot of people, because you don't have 50 administrative staff working in the office doing nothing, just sitting there picking their noses. So essentially what I'm saying is this online education system truly shows you how inefficient government education is. And if we just let the private sector, I mean, all these programs that I'm using now for online are all private, right? I'm using Zoom for video. I'm using Blackboard. All these are private companies that are evolving, but again, we're being hindered by our ability to evolve and to improve our current state because of the government, which has no incentive to improve, but actually has an incentive to push it back and push it back, because that's how government operates. So how can government help? First thing I would do is stop these lockdowns, stop these emergency orders. Excuse me. Because again, this is all hindering people's freedom, right? At the end of the day, everybody knows that the coronavirus is dangerous. The government, when they're out there on these news conferences and they're talking about people not taking it seriously, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what the coronavirus is and how it transfers between people. Now, some people, they acknowledge that, but they're still continuing on with their daily life because it's their own choice. If somebody decides to go outside and take a walk, or go inside and go to a business, it's their own voluntary action. It's their own consciousness that they chose to do those actions. It's not that they're ignorant. You may think that they're ignorant, but again, that's your opinion. They have a choice to do these things, even though people are telling them, don't go outside. Again, it's another thing if you just try to inform people about the virus, but it's another thing of forcing people. And now you see in New York right now, where I live, if you're caught outside, I mean, during certain times you can get a fine, you can get jailed, I think for a year. It's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that I can't go outside, regardless of what it is, I can't leave my house. And if they catch me doing something, I get fined and possibly even thrown into jail. It really just shows you how the government uses these times of crisis to abuse its powers and sort of to show how powerful it is. So, again, last week I decided to, I think it was a couple days ago actually, I decided to go to Dunkin' Donuts. I wanted some donuts at night. It was like 7 o'clock. And I went out to Dunkin' Donuts, closed. My McDonald's was closed. I think maybe the drive-thru was open. But there was a long line. They didn't allow anybody to sit in the restaurant. And you could see this is all because of government. The government has said you aren't able to sit in. That hurts us. Now we have to wait online on a drive-thru. A lot of places that don't have drive-thrus are closed. A lot of people that don't have delivering services, Dunkin' Donuts, for example, is closed. So you could see how people are saying, "Wait, why are these businesses closing?" They wouldn't close if they had if they had their own freedom to keep themselves open. But the government has hindered their freedom and forced them to close without leaving it up to us to decide what we want for ourselves. Right? If a business decides to stay open, and you think that business is crazy for staying open, then don't go there. But why should you force somebody else to not go to that business? If again, it's the freedom of the individual that matters. If somebody else decides to go to a store and you disagree with his opinion, you can't force your opinion on him. At the end of the day, it's your opinion. If you feel like the best thing for anybody to do is to stay home, just stay home. Now, you can go on television and tell people to stay home, but forcing people to stay home is another story. So I think stopping these lockdowns will help people recover, in which people can go back to work. I mean, obviously more people are working from home already, but a lot of people who can't work from home, they should still be going to work. Now, if they feel like the virus is going to be detrimental to them, like if they know for a fact that if they go outside they might get sick, then they should stay home. They should have the savings to be able to financially survive, I guess, at home, in which they could start taking money from their savings. And that's the whole point of having savings, is to save for a rainy day. Like this, like a perfect example would be this virus. If there's a virus that you know you're going to get sick and you go outside and you might get sick, so you decide to stay home, you could then start eating away at your savings. But that's another problem that we have to assess. Now, why don't people have enough savings to do this? Somebody might say, oh, well, if that person decides to stay home, then he doesn't have savings. All right, then let's answer that question. Why doesn't he have savings? It's because, again, first of all, if he puts his money, parks it in the bank, it's not getting any interest because interest rates are super low and everybody's in debt. The reason why people aren't saving is because the government incentivizes more and more people to take on more and more debt. He probably has negative net wealth because of all the debt he has incurred. Now, why is he taking on so much debt? It's because the Fed is pumping out cheap money into the economy and it's driving interest rates down, and it's encouraging people to take on more and more debt. So right there, I solved that problem. People don't have savings because they've taken on too much debt because interest rates are too low. So you can see how all these problems, again, if you cascade them down to the root, it's because of government. In an ideal situation, an ideal capitalist economy, during this time, people are supposed to have savings so that they can cope with these losses, right? If there's a virus out there, people can stay home, but they could start using their savings to buy food, to order food. Businesses can have savings businesses can have savings of themselves. Businesses can have savings in themselves so that they can start paying their employees. But unfortunately, businesses are also loaded up on debt. So everybody's loaded up on debt. And again, whenever there's a time of crisis, your income could go out, but your debt is still there. That's the thing that people need to understand, right? Debt doesn't go away due to changes in the circumstances. Income could go away, right? Your income could decrease, your income could increase, your income could just go away completely, but your debt is still there no matter what. So that's why debt is much more dangerous than than uh, than losing your income. So is the ability to have savings is what helps us get out of these times of crisis. So number two, don't prop up the stock market. Right, the only people who want the stock market propped up are right wealthy individuals, millionaires, billionaires who don't want to lose money. All these people in Wall Street who don't want to lose money. And if you let the market tank, they're going to lose money because they've invested in all these companies that have taken on so much debt, and now they're going to suffer the consequences by investing in companies that they know that can't be viable, right? A business is supposed to survive this. As I said, they're supposed to have savings. They're supposed to have the ability to and during times of crisis still pay their workers and have some sort of backup plan. But obviously they don't. They're loaded up on debt instead of loaded up on savings, and you're seeing that. And the investors who invested in this should be punished. And how does the market punish them? By letting them lose money. But again, you're not seeing that. You're seeing the government quickly come in trying to prop up all these businesses that have, and it's sort of, again, encouraging them to say, you know what, load up on debt. If you have a loss, the government will cover you. So again, it's private gains, socialized losses. And again, the fact that this bull market, this rally so far that we've had since the election of Trump, I mean, you can discount the end of 2018. The fact that all these gains were wiped out in less than a month shows you that this growth was unsustainable. It was a bubble growth, right? Bubbles pop easily. You just have to take a needle and the bubble goes away. Inflating a bubble is also easy. You just pump more air into the bubble. What takes time is actual real economic growth to grow. And when you have real economic growth, it's hard for that economic growth to collapse because the economy has a stronger foundation, and it'll take a real crisis, a large scale crisis for the economy to collapse. But when you have a bubble economy, a small thing, I mean, coronavirus is not a small thing, but the fact that we've been only under quarantine for a week and the whole thing is coming down shows you of this unsustainable bubble growth that we had since the election of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself called it a bubble economy. And he sort of just perpetrated and inflated the bubble even more. So I don't see people talking about that a lot. The fact that this growth was a bubble economy growth, right? It was a bubble growth. Shows you how easy it is for bubbles to get popped, right? It may give you an illusion that they're being inflated, and they've been inflated at a very drastic rate, but they can pop in less. Now that we see less than a month. And I guess another thing that the government could do is to help businesses during this time of crisis, and the only way to help them is to roll back some of these regulations. And it's weird, this stimulus bill is supposed to have tons and tons of layers of regulations piled onto it. I mean, you're seeing businesses forced to pay their companies paid leave and sick paid leave. And you wouldn't have to do any of this stuff if the businesses were financially sound. The fact that businesses are not financially sound is the reason why they aren't able to provide these benefits for their workers. And now the government is not only going to keep them financially unsound or not, financially unstable, and now they're going to force businesses to adhere to all these new regulations that's being imposed on them. And again, this is the way that the government destroys an economy, because what it does is it regulates these businesses to the point where they can't operate until the businesses just collapse and the government takes over. That's the timeline that I've talked about in my other podcasts. The business, the government makes it impossible for businesses to operate. That's the whole point. It makes them impossible to operate by putting all these regulations on them and all this bureaucratic red tape until the point where the businesses just can't operate, and all the businesses go bankrupt, and now the sole provider for the economy has to be the government. So as you can see, the stimulus bill has a lot of government in it, a lot of more regulations, more more benefits, more forced. Again, I'm gonna use forced benefits, and this is just gonna make it even harder for companies to recover if they have to comply with all these regulations. What you should be doing is actually taking the time now to roll back these regulations by saying, all right, there's a time of crisis. Let's roll back on these regulations to make it easier for you to do your business. And by rolling back the regulations, you're going to make it more easier for the company to operate. You're making it more profitable for the company. And then in that circumstance, the company could then afford to keep the workers on the payroll for another week or another 2 weeks. But it's the complete opposite, right? If you see somebody struggling, you don't come and then impose more commands on them, right? If I'm very tired, I'm sweating, right? I just ran a mile. You don't tell the business, all right, now you have to run another block. You have to lift that. You have to do that. No, you don't do that. You have to make it easier for the business. How would making it harder for the business to operate by forcing all these regulations on it help the business during this time of crisis? I just don't see the logic in that. If you see these businesses struggling, rightfully so, because they're not supposed to struggle. They've taken on too much debt, but obviously, and again, that's why I'm listing all these things that the government has to do, because ideally it needs to do these in tangent. But you're seeing the businesses struggle. How is passing more regulations and telling them to do more things going to help the situation? I mean, if a business can't even pay their employees, how are they going to be able to afford to pay them sick leave and all these things and comply with these regulations? They're going to do that by taking on more debt, right? I mean, if you're a business, you can't fire this person, and now you have to pay for them several weeks after they leave you. The only real solution to that is for you to borrow more money, and it's the government is incentivizing you to borrow more money because it's lower the interest rates. So we need to do the complete opposite, which is to make it easier for these businesses to operate. And once we make it easier for the business to operate, hopefully when this virus goes away, you could see businesses really start to improve and get more financially stable. And then you'll realize, oh wait, maybe we didn't need all those regulations. In fact, maybe they were hindering businesses. But again, during this time of crisis, we need to make it easier for businesses, not harder. And I guess one of the last things that I've thought of that the government could do is, again, once we recover and again, we need to incentivize people to start saving. This is a perfect lesson. The fact that we've let this virus completely destroy our economic foundation and the lack thereof actually proves to you that people aren't saving. The fact that this person, once he's let go of the job, right away he's unemployed and right away he's in poverty and he has all these debt, proves to you that he didn't have any savings, and we've made it impossible for Americans to start saving. We need to make it easier for Americans to start saving, and that means raising interest rates, not keeping interest rates too low, and letting businesses again not collect debt. And again, this is for everybody. We can't let people easily collect debt, and I think that's why we see throughout history people demonizing debt, because debt is never a way to prosperity. You can never borrow your way to prosperity. You can never print your way into prosperity. And we've sort of made it accustomed to Americans now. And I mean, I'm in class. I've taken a finance class, and then they're all talking about leveraging up. And I don't think leveraging up is a sustainable way to wealth, because it's sort of when you're leveraging yourself, you're sort of taking a bet. You're saying, all right, I'm gonna get this money, borrow this money, and in hopes that this money will make me more money. But that is not the way it works. You need to have savings. You could bet on your savings. You can't bet on borrowed money, because then you're sort of hurting two parties versus just hurting yourself, because that person saved up his money to just lend it to you, and then he's gonna end up losing, versus if you saved up your money and you bet wrong, you take the losses, not somebody else. So we need to incentivize Americans to save. And what we're seeing now during this coronavirus is people are not saving. People don't have savings. So when their income goes away, people should have savings so that they could eat away and use during this times of crisis. But what we're seeing is people don't have savings, and when crisis strikes them, as they should be prepared for, um, and always, that's the whole point of having savings, is to save for a rainy day. And when you see people struggle because they lost their job, immediately they're struggling, it shows you that they don't have savings. And again, ideally you should have enough money saved up to sustain yourself for 4 months or 4 to 6 months. I think that was the survey, because by the time 4 and 6 months passes by, you should be able to look for another job. But people don't even have savings to sustain themselves for the current moment because they're in debt. So as you can see, that this is all a problem of the government. The government has made this crisis last even longer, and is making it worse because it made Americans unable to have accumulated savings. Because Americans aren't able to save, this crisis hurts them even more, because now they can't sustain themselves without a job. And obviously they're going to lose their job if businesses are also hit with this crisis. You're also seeing government make it harder for businesses to operate. So now the government has more power and the ability to regulate these businesses even more and to pass even more regulations. And then last but not least, you're seeing the government having the ability to manipulate the economy, to manipulate the flow of money, right? By propping up the stock market, it's obviously going to lower rates, it's going to print more money. And this clearly shows how the government and the Fed are working hand in hand. They're sort of one entity now. They're no longer two split up entities. So as we can see, this crisis is clearly showing you, and it's stripping down the forces of government. And it's sort of exposing the government for what it is, and the ability to affect our lives at the end of the day. I also wanted to add the taxation part of what's been happening, because again, what government taxes essentially is our savings, right? If I have income and I work for an employer and I get income, that income is being taxed, and it's essentially hindering my ability to save my income. Think about all the money that we could have had in excess right now from if the government didn't tax us. Because if you think about it, all the money that's not taxed is coming back to me, and I could use that money to save for this rainy day. So a lot of these businesses that right now can't sustain themselves, they could have been able to sustain themselves if they had adequate savings that wasn't taxed. And it's sort of this goes into the Keynesian economics, in which consuming and spending is inherently good for an economy than savings. But as you can see, this is where this problem unfolds, in that spending isn't going to do you no good during a time of crisis. Savings is what does you good, because savings is what allows you to sustain yourselves, even though your income goes out, right? Spending is only good to a certain extent, in which I'm able to get the goods. But at the end of the day, savings is what allows me to create goods, and during a time of crisis, to sustain myself. And what you see is, because the government has taxed us, it's taxed the workers and the businesses, we're both suffering because of this. I, as an individual, might have had adequate savings and might have had the ability to sustain myself. Let's say, for example, that I lost my job and I can't. If the government hasn't taxed, portions progressively over time from my income. Because the money is at the end of the day, the money is best at the hands of who earned it, because it's best at the end of the day for the people rather than government, because the government says, you know what, your income, we believe that we could be more efficient and provide a better source of good for your income than if you were to keep it yourself. But that's the complete opposite, because first of all, the government is taxing everybody, so it's sort of it's a net zero effect. If the government sort of doesn't tax everybody, everybody has more wealth. Everybody's better off because they have more money. But supposedly the government wants to tax wealth, take it away from everybody, and then give it back to everybody while also taking its own cut. And I've talked about the way the structure works in a previous podcast. But again, this also shows that when the government taxes us, it's getting rid of our ability to save. And I mean, that's an important freedom right there. The ability for me to save my hard work. Let's say I worked for a week and I made $1,000. Now, yeah, I might spend 50 of that, but I want to save that $100. But no, the government says I need to tax it, and it's hindering my ability to save. And again, it incentivizes people to spend, because a lot of people who make excessive amounts of income, now their only incentive and their only the thinking is that if I spend the money, I get taxed less than if I save it. And if you think about it, if I'm a millionaire and I made $100,000 one year, instead of and I tell myself, wait a second, if I save that money, then I get taxed. What if I spend it right away on a car? Right? And again, it's weird how our consumption taxes are lower than our income taxes. That's a bit strange. But if an individual then spends that money on a car, they get taxed less. So the individual is sort of inclined to consume their money and use it to spend it, not to consume their money, rather spend it. But the individual, again, is inclined to spend rather than to save. And again, someone who decides to save the money is actually doing a benefit to society versus someone who just spends the money on himself, right? If, again, as I said with the example before, with that $100,000, if I spend it on a car, I've had a very small effect on society. I sort of gained myself. Obviously, now I have the ability to ride in luxury, which is a benefit to me. I mean, yeah, I paid the workers who made that car, and now the company makes a sale. But I could have had a much more positive effect on society if I sort of put my my needs and my wants to the side. So instead of benefiting myself, I tell myself, you know what? Let me save my money, and I can put my money into a bank account in which the bank can then make investments and lend out the money to other businesses and for other businesses to grow. And I can have an impact on a much more larger scale than if I were to just purchase a car and benefit that single company. If I save my money, it can have a much more positive net positive effect on society. And then not only that, but you get rewarded for that, because now you can gain a profit on the money that you saved, and you can gain interest on that money. So it's a huge net positive if an individual saves his money versus if he spent it. And the system that we have now incentivizes people to spend their money rather than to save it. And any money that isn't spent should be saved, but then that money gets taxed. So any money that gets taxed is money that could have been saved for the individual or for a business in this case. And this also leads to people not having adequate saving during these times of crisis, and in which they're more inclined to demand government assistance. And again, this is the cycle. Government taxes you, it gets rid of your ability to save money and accumulate wealth. Obviously, during a rainy day, you're able to use your accumulated wealth and reap the benefits of saving. So the government takes away your ability to saving money. And then when a time of crisis comes, you can't use your savings. Who do you look to for support? The government. So it's just a cycle. And obviously, again, we're seeing that unfold now, where people are out of savings. And if only they weren't taxed on their entire accumulated income over the years, they would have had more savings now. I mean, this is the whole point of having money, is to prepare yourself during a time of crisis. And again, it's all the ability to save. And we're seeing that unfold. And again, we could talk hours and hours about consuming and saving, and how consuming slash spending. I don't know why I always I use the word consuming instead of spending, but I'm basically saying the same thing. spending versus savings, and those are two opposite ends. And I think savings is inherently more important than spending, and the government inclines us to spend our money more so that during times of crisis we don't have the money saved up, and then we could look towards the government for support. And I feel like people need to realize that. So anyways, that's the end of the podcast. Again, hopefully I stayed consistent on my points and I didn't get off topic, because I realized I tend to do that a lot. It's just because there's so much information to get out at once that I tend to just start skipping, trying to get everything at once. But I think I should sort of focus more on individual topics and sort of control myself and save my knowledge. You see, here's where saving comes in handy. And then use other videos to explain what I'm trying to get at, instead of trying to compile everything into one. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.